Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Voices of Madison Park. On this edition of the show, we are hosting a Women's History Month speaker series, highlighting women who advocate for equality, diversity, and inclusion. My name is Lanai, and I'm excited to host this show along with many female students in the audience. Moving on to our Did You Know segment, since we're celebrating Women's History Month, I want to share some fun facts about women's history. Did you know that Lydia Taft was the first woman to vote in colonial America? This was under the British rule in Massachusetts. Did you also know that Leavitt's Law was named after Henrietta Swan Leavitt after she discovered the correlation between how bright a star is and the time it takes for the star to go from bright to dim? For this first episode, we have an amazing guest, Dr. Sarah S. Willen, an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Connecticut, where she also co-directs for the research program on global health and human rights at the University of Human Rights Institute, and also co-founder of the Pandemic Project. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Sarah S. Willen. Thank you for joining us today. And can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you so much for having me. So I'm Sarah Willen. I'm a professor at UConn. I'm an anthropologist, so my research is all about culture, and I focus a lot on health, so the intersection of culture and health. I'm also a mom. I have two kids, an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. And I used to live in Boston, so it's very cool to be here with all of you today.
Yeah, that's nice. Well, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So as a professor, there are kind of three main things we do. One of them is we are part of the university. We serve on committees and that kind of stuff. The other big thing we do, of course, is that we teach, and I love teaching. I teach classes on what we call medical anthropology, so everything about culture and health, and also about social determinants of health and health disparities. And I teach other topics too. And then the other thing we do is research, and I've done research on a couple of different topics. I did a really big project with a big, amazing team on health equity issues, where we did a lot of interviews. We interviewed 170 people in the city I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And we were asking people about their experiences of whether they feel like they're treated fairly in society and whether they have access to everything they need to lead healthy lives. So we talked to people of all different backgrounds, ages, socioeconomic statuses, and heard a lot of different stories. And so we took all of those stories and then used them to do some research articles, and then also do a big survey with 3,000 people. And we're still writing up things we're learning. And then another big research project is the one I think we're going to talk about today, which is called the Pandemic Journaling Project. But I'll let you ask the questions.
Well, can you just tell us a little bit about what it's like being in the anthropology field, let alone being a woman in the anthropology field?
Sure. So I think there's sort of two parts of that. The first part is really, what is it to be a professor? And the journey to getting to be a professor is really, really long. I was in school till I was 30. That's a very long time. But it also is, and I think this is true for anyone who does research. If you're a professor, you spend a lot of your time doing research, which means you come up with things that you care about. Often things that bother you about the world that you think we need to understand better. And then you dig in and you ask hard questions, and you have a lot of freedom and a lot of independence. So I've loved the fact that in each of the big projects I've done, I've been able to say, okay, and usually in my work, here's an injustice, or here's a space where I see a community of people who are not being given the opportunities that they deserve, or whose health is suffering because they're experiencing discrimination or exclusion or racism, or often some intersection of all of these kinds of factors. And then using my research skills to listen to people, to connect with people. I love interviewing people. That's one of the things we do most in our research in anthropology. And it's given me a lot of freedom to be able to really, dig into those priorities and then produce research that can hopefully help change things for better.
Yeah. Why do you feel like your field matters?
Yeah, so I think, my field, and I'm going to speak specifically about medical anthropology, which I study. I think it matters because it gives us a way of looking at all the things that become invisible to us. So I know there are people in this room who are going to work in the health profession, and there are people in this room who are going to work in technology professions, and all of us at some point are going to be sick. We're going to have to go to a doctor, or we might have a loved one who's in the hospital. And we're going to encounter people in medical professions and health professions. But sometimes we don't see the kinds of injustices and inequities that are even built into the healthcare systems that we live in. Yeah. We don't see necessarily that sometimes when people are training to be a healthcare provider, they're being trained to repeat discriminatory systems and repeat racist assumptions within their profession. And so one of the things that people in my field do is try and study how people train to become a health professional. We train to look at systems of health, like hospital systems and public health systems, and try and see where are the leverage points for change, right? So one of the things I did when I was living here in Boston was I observed a class for people who are training to be psychiatrists. So psychiatrists are mental health professionals. And this was a class that was meant to get all of the psychiatrists to understand cultural diversity and to understand that, what it's like to work with people whose background might be different from your own. And the thing is, and we talk about this a lot sometimes now, like DEI classes or, cultural sensitivity classes, like sometimes they mess up because instead of helping people understand how to connect better, they actually make people they see difference instead of seeing connection. And this was a class, excuse me while I take a sip here. Yeah. This was a class that was meant to get people to be better in their encounters with people of different cultural backgrounds or racial or ethnic backgrounds. And instead, everybody felt insulted. People of color felt insulted. People who were white felt like they were being talked down to and accused of being the source of problems. And so what we were able to do was sort of show how this class that was meant to be helpful actually was doing harm. And then we wrote about it and we published this article. And now that article is something that people read when they figure out how to try and do better. And one of the main things that we want people to understand is if you want to get people to connect, clinicians and patients to connect, even if they're coming from a different place, the first thing you got to do is see who you are. Yeah. Right? And recognize what your own assumptions are and recognize how your own background is going to influence that relationship, right? So like, for me, as someone who is, seen as white, who came from a middle-class background, who's had a lot of privilege in my life, if I can't sort of own all of that, and I come in pretending like I know how to interact with people whose background is different from mine, there's really a potential for mismatch, right? So the first thing I've got to do is own where I'm coming from. Yeah. So that's one of the things that came out of a research study that I did. We published an article about it, and now that's in the world. That article is there as a resource for other people who are going to teach people in the health professions. Yeah. So it's very exciting to be in a field where we start with these tiny little research questions and tiny little research projects, but then they can become part of systems change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, how would you say, how has entering this study, your field, anthropology, how has that changed your mindset overall?
Wow, that is a good question. So the first thing I'll say in answering is I knew I wanted to be a medical anthropologist when I was 19. I took a class. I started college a little early, and I took a class in my third year of college about everything we're talking about now, about how you can use research methods like interviewing, and our other big research method is called participant observation, which basically means you hang out with people.
Yeah.
You hang out, you see what they do, you get to know them, you go for a walk around the neighborhood, you go to church with them, you go to parties with them, and you learn from hanging out and like being real, right?
Yeah.
So I'm losing track of your question, but it was a really good one.
Oh, how has getting into your field impacted your overall mindset?
Right,
Yeah.
awesome. So I would say, each project I've done has been, it's like I enter a new world and I have a chance to develop genuine relationships with people who often are really different from me, whose worlds are really different from mine. And it's given me a sense of how big the world is, how different our life experiences are, and also how, the things that were totally normal for me growing up are really unusual. Like that's just one tiny little window on the world, my own little background growing up, as a middle-class white girl in Cleveland, Ohio. But there are so many other ways of experiencing the world, and I've had a chance to glimpse some other ones. So I think I could talk about this for an hour, but I think one thing I'll sort of say in particular is that being trained in anthropology and having the opportunity to do research in anthropology and specifically in medical anthropology has helped me recognize that each of us is living a really different life, and that if we want to make changes in the world, we've got to recognize,
Everybody else's.
yeah, or at least open ourselves to the fact that there's so much we don't know,
Yeah.
right? And that if we want to actually work for change, we have to find ways to build bridges. We have to. Otherwise, how can we work together? How can we find solidarity? How can we make changes in the systems and structures that are designed to make some people's lives really easy and other people's lives much harder?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. Well, as a co-director for the research program on the global health and human rights, what does the job entail specifically?
Yeah, so this is a small group of students and faculty who share interests in exactly your theme for this month, in equity and really looking at issues of human rights violations when people are being treated wrong, or they're being victimized or violated because the laws are not protecting them. We're specifically interested in health areas. So basically that's a small piece of what I do. And we bring together faculty and students to work together on projects, to read new articles or books that we think are important, that we think can give us new ideas for how we can work for change, for how we can use our research skills and our experience to work for change. So it's a kind of small part of what I do, but it's a really important one because it puts me in conversation with a much bigger community of researchers who are sort of interested in the same kind of work of promoting justice.
Yeah. Well, can you just tell us a little bit about the pandemic journaling project and what was the purpose for it?
Absolutely. So the pandemic journaling project is it's a project that I created together with another professor, another medical anthropologist named Kate Mason, who's at Brown University in Rhode Island at Providence. And it was born really at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I'm not sure how much folks in this room remember the beginning of the pandemic. We all were different ages, right, when that happened.
I think a lot of us remember. There was like a point where I was in middle school and I was going to high school, and like it was a gap in between that.
Yeah, so like what do you remember about those first days? Do you have like any distinct memories of?
Well, I remember the day that they told us it was supposed to be like a break, like a week break.
Yeah.
And I remember like Little Uzi was coming out with an album, and like Fortnite had just came out, just like little stuff.
Yeah.
I don't remember specifically, no. Yeah.
But you have some memories of that moment, and I think every one of us has memories of that moment, and they're different. So, two things were going through my mind in that moment. First one is that I've kept a journal a lot of my life. Not every day, like not even every month. Some years I don't even write in it at all. But I've always felt like writing helps me like process
Yeah.
and kind of get my feelings out and then feel a little better about stuff. So when this happened, when we kind of first realized that everything was going to be disrupted and that all of us were at risk, my first impulse was to write stuff down, to journal.
Yeah.
The other thing that was going through my mind and also Kate's was everyone should have a chance to write down what's going on with them. Everyone should have the opportunity to make a record of how these global transformative experiences are affecting them. And so we started talking and thinking, and within a couple of weeks, we put together an online platform called the Pandemic Journaling Project that invited people all over the world to take just a couple minutes a week to record how the pandemic was affecting them. And we wanted to make it really easy, so you could do it all on your phone or on a computer or an iPad. And you could do it by writing journal entries. You could record audio entries and then upload them, or you could take pictures. So we wanted to kind of explode the idea of journaling and say, like, journaling isn't just for people who like to sit and write in a notebook. It could be taking pictures and then uploading them and putting a comment on that picture. Yeah. And so this project ran people around. We had more than 1,800 people from all over the world participate, so 55 countries. And we ran it as a weekly journaling platform for 2 years. So every Tuesday afternoon, we would send a text message or an email and say, like, hey, it's time to make your entries. And then we would give some questions. So people would have a little bit of guidance. It wouldn't just be totally, out of your head. Yeah. And then it's sort of taken on a lot of different dimensions from there. We did a photo exhibition that's traveled to 5 cities in 4 different countries. And we've done a bunch of research articles, and now we're starting to work on a book.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's pretty cool.
Well, how has the project benefit you and dear partner Kate, who created it? Yeah,
I think for us, in a lot of ways. One way in particular is that I feel like I was talking earlier about how as anthropologists we have these research skills and we have these research tools. We found a way to like pivot, right? We found a way to adapt those skills and put them to good use at a moment when it really mattered, So we have more than 27,000 individual journal entries that have been created by more than 1,800 people. So it's this huge mass of material. It's an archive that we can use to learn, and this is sort of the really important piece. We've preserved it so that researchers in the future can use it. So imagine your grandchildren want to do a project on COVID-19. They don't want to just read books and like reports. They want to actually hear voices of people like you and like us in this room who actually lived through it, who have memories of it. They can go into these journal entries and hear audio of people being like, my mom lost her job and now I don't know how we're going to pay for our rent. Hear people talk about saying, we don't know what to do with our groceries. Like, do we have to keep wiping down our groceries? Are our groceries gonna, get us sick? People talking in their own voices or writing in their own voices about their own experiences. All that material, first person, immediate, is gonna be available to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So we've created something that has this historical value, and that's really meaningful. Yeah. The other thing I would just say is researchers are often about producing knowledge. We don't usually get to produce something that can actually help people. But for a lot of the people who participated in the project, they've told us, like, yeah, it felt really good to be able to have a place to reflect each week. It felt really good to know that I was putting my story in a place where other people could learn from it. And so to be able to create a research project that actually like even had some mental health benefit for some people, that's pretty rewarding.
Yeah, that's amazing. If you don't mind giving us just a little bit of insight about your book, Dignity, Migrant Lives at Israel Margins.
Yeah, Fighting for Dignity. Yeah, so that was my first big research project. And it was based in Tel Aviv, Israel. And what I was doing in that project is I moved to Tel Aviv and I hung out with people who had come as migrants looking for work in Israel. So these were people from Ghana, Nigeria, the Philippines, and then a lot of other places. But mostly I was working with folks from those communities and trying to understand what it's like to live in a society where they were not particularly welcome, but where their labor was welcome. Yeah. So what's it like to be in that particular country at that particular moment in time as people who are really excited about the opportunity to earn money to support their families, their immediate families, and also their families at home, but who are living in a society that has a lot of discrimination, a lot of what we call structural racism, structural inequality that made it so that they would never, in the majority of cases, they and their children wouldn't have an opportunity to integrate fully into society. So I spent from the year 2000 to 2003, which I know feels like ancient history. I lived in Tel Aviv and hung out with people and went to a lot of parties, went to church a lot, spent a lot of time just hanging out with people, and I was especially interested in women's experiences when they were pregnant, so I spent a lot of time with pregnant women, and I was in the labor and delivery room with a couple of women when their babies were born, and so I spent a lot of time learning about those experiences, and so that's why the title of the book is Fighting for Dignity, Migrant Lives at Israel's Margins, because it's really about the lives of people who migrated, and the way in which, even though so much is pressing down on them, in everything they do, they are working to live meaningful lives and lives full of dignity.
And now I would like to open up the microphone to the women in the audience with questions.
How did, if you could go into more detail about how you got into, anthropology and how, it just became an interest to you that you pursued it completely?
Yeah. That's a great question, how I became interested in anthropology. I took a class, and it was a class, it's really appropriate actually to Women's History Month. It was a class about women's reproductive health, and about how there was one book in particular that kind of blew my mind. It was a book about what it was like to give birth in a hospital in the United States, and this research was done in the 1970s or the 1980s. And it talked about what would happen when a woman would come into a hospital. You'd come in, they'd put you in a wheelchair, make you put on hospital clothes, so you can't wear your own clothes, shave you, put iodine on you, make you lie on your back for the delivery, and everyone managing the delivery would be the medical staff kind of looking at you and treating you like someone who's got to satisfy them on their schedule, right? In a way that took all the power away from the birthing woman. And it became a woman delivering a baby in the context of the system the system just wanted to keep running. And that meant, treating you like a patient, treating you like an object in some respects, not allowing women to move around while they were birthing, not giving women options for what their birth experience would be like, not thinking about how women of different cultural backgrounds might have different needs, different expectations in terms of who's with them in the delivery room. And I read this book, it's called Birth as an American Rite of Passage, and it blew my mind. It blew my mind because it was this really vivid image of how much the medical system was taking power away from women in the moment of women's bodies doing the most amazing thing they can do, right? And I thought, wow, this field has some pretty powerful tools for understanding power and inequality and for creating change. And so I read that book, and I took it in the context of that class on maternal and reproductive health, and it kind of blew my mind. And I didn't immediately say, okay, I'm going to be a medical anthropologist, that's it. I said, I'm going to study medical anthropology, and I'm also going to study nursing and midwifery, and I want to be a midwife, but also maybe do some research. And then I kind of tried to do both, and that was sort of too much. And then I ended up letting go of the clinical side of things and focusing on the research side. But in my heart, there's this part of me that says, I should have been a clinician. That would have been a really beautiful way to have an impact in the world. Yeah. But that was sort of the process, and that's a really good question. I really appreciate being asked.
Yeah. We have one more in the crowd here. Yeah, one more and then we move to trivia.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you, what are some ways women can advocate for themselves, either professionally or in life, especially with people like family members or people they just met? What are some ways they can advocate for themselves if they feel like someone is saying, oh, maybe you shouldn't do this or do that because I'm a woman?
That's a really good question and a really important question. I think one of the first things we can do, we heard some facts, women's history facts a little bit earlier. Yeah. One of the things we can do is find models of women who've done the things that we want to do. And know that even if those aren't people we've met in our own lives or who live in our own communities, that those people exist and they've done the things that we're dreaming of, and we can model ourselves on them. So I think this is why I'm a huge fan of libraries. Like, I believe in libraries. Like, I just think they're one of the most important institutions in our society, in part because they open doors onto exactly this. You know, where do we find those models of people that we can aspire to be like, we can learn from? So that's one key thing I think we can do. Another thing I think we can do is whenever someone tells us something that suggests that we're not enough, to stop, take a deep breath, and ask ourselves, where did that come from? Because that question wasn't about us, that question was about the person who asked it. Yeah. So I think, you know, we can, if someone says something or asks something that undermines our confidence or that's meant to undermine our confidence, we can take that moment to breathe and say, that question wasn't about me, that question was about that person. And what do I know about myself? What do I know about my goals and my abilities and my dreams? And then to find those people who are going to see the same dreams and have the same confidence in us and give us that support. So I think those are just a couple of things we can do to know who our models are, to remember that criticism or efforts to undermine us, they're not about us. We need to sort of not be bothered by them too much, and then to find those people who are going to support us, who are going to help us find our way and remind us who we are and what we're capable of.
Amazing answer. Well, those were some great questions. For our next segment, we will. I would like to invite you and the audience to participate into a trivia. So I have a couple trivia questions, and you can answer them. Or if you don't have an answer, the audience can join in if they'd like.
Might need to work together, guys.
Yeah. Which amendment allowed women to vote?
All right, guys, who's got it for us? What do we think? Not a constitutional scholar, so I need my team here.
19th Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Do you agree with that?
I'm with my team.
Yeah, that's correct. The 19th Amendment. Next question. Which artist was known for her self-portraits and depiction of Mexican folk culture? Frida Kahlo, Teresa Berda, or Tamara de Lempicka?
Frida, are we with Frida? Yeah. All right, Frida Kahlo.
Yeah, that's correct. Who wrote the classic Gothic novel Frankenstein? Virginia Woolf, Mary Shelley, or Margaret Atwood?
I got this one too, but you guys with me on number 2, Mary Shelley?
Yeah.
All right, we're with Mary Shelley.
That's correct. Well, yeah, what led Madam C.J. Walker to becoming the first self-made black female millionaire? Was it the Barbie doll movie, beauty and hair products, or electric refrigerator?
Oh, definitely beauty and hair products.
Yeah. And yeah. Which scientist's contribution led to the discovery of the structure of DNA? Rosalind Franklin, Lisa Meitner, or Rachel Carson?
Rosalind Franklin?
Yeah.
I see some nods. Okay, we're good.
And last question. Who was the first openly transgender woman to appear on the cover of Time magazine? Janet Mock, India Moore, or Laverne Cox?
Is it Laverne? Laverne Cox.
Yeah, Laverne. You guys
Okay, thank you guys.
Yeah, and that concludes our interview today. Let's thank Dr. Sarah S. Willen for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And the quote of the week before we end: "Strong women don't have attitudes. We have standards." Marilyn Monroe. And please stay tuned for the next episodes in this series. We have Nicole Huey, Dr. Jamila Davis, and Dr. Kelly Williams, inspirational women who want to tell their stories to inspire the young generation. Thank you for joining us on today's episode, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.